Winter maintenance.
Madam Mayor, it's a report that requires some direction from Council today in terms of potential service increases for winter. So I could provide a quick overview for Council if you would like that.
Yes, why don't you do so? It's
sure. So if Council recalls, we had a report a few weeks ago at General Committee where we outlined 6 potential service level increases for our winter maintenance program. We also outlined at that meeting some changes to our minimum maintenance standards. So the 2 reports were separate, but they kind of spoke to each other. At that meeting, Council asked us to consider 4 options to come back to Budget Committee, and those 4 options form the basis of the report that's in front of you today. Out of those 4 options, we are only able to do 2 for November 1st, 2019, and we've laid out the implications of that from a financial perspective. So today we're seeking direction from Council on if they would like any service level increases related to those 2 options. And those 2 options are pedestrian accessibility at sidewalks and bus stops, and the other one was an enhanced level of service for removal of snow on bike lanes on the roads. So that's the report that's in front of you today.
Very good. Councillor Parrish.
And do I understand from what you just said we can't consider windrows for November?
That's correct, Councillor. We went back and took a look at our existing winter maintenance contract, and the equipment that would be required is not included as part of the provisional items in our contract. So it means that we would have to go back out to market and tender. And what we're suggesting is it's a tight turnaround for November 1st, but we'd like to include that as a provisional item in the new winter maintenance contract, so that you'll have another decision to make on that at a future date.
Okay, thank you very much. I serve an area that has a lot of seniors, and 75-year-olds are struggling with it. What happens is they get very icy and it's hard for them to clear. So I promised I'd keep asking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Demerla.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying is we can do this beginning this winter, October 1st, and that there would be no budget implications. That's how I'm reading it. I just wanted some clarification.
Yeah, I'll just provide some clarification, Councillor. So for 2019, there is a cost increase for that, and what the report outlines is that we can utilize the winter maintenance reserve to fund the one-time cost for 2019. However, for 2020, there would be a budget impact that would be reflected in our 2020 business plan. And just for context, on top of, if you recall, the presentation that Jeff Jackson made at Budget Committee last week, where he had forecasted a 4.9% increase. So the winter maintenance at bus stops and priority sidewalks for 2020 would add 0.4% to that rate. And the winter maintenance removal on bike lanes was a 1% increase for 2020. So that's outlined in the report, but I'm happy to speak to that in more detail.
So thank you for that clarification. If it's being taken out of our reserve, winter maintenance reserve, I'd just like to understand what is the impact on, I guess the reserve is for certain emergency situations. How would that impact? How much of the reserve would be used up? And what I'm struggling with is if we approve this now, it would be very difficult in 2020 to say no. I mean, it's then done. You can't put a service in and then pull it back. And it's really hard for me to weigh in as to whether it's something we do or we don't do, because I don't understand what this means in terms of what other things we cannot do because we choose to do this, because it's just, you know, it's something that's coming to us. It's always a good idea to increase service levels, but what does this mean? You've hinted at what it means in terms of a tax increase, but I need to understand the overall picture in 2020, what this is going to mean in terms of what else we cannot do, particularly given some of the uncertainties around what's going to be happening at the regional level in terms of our ability to at least keep existing services going. Setting aside increasing service levels. So this is a really difficult decision for me to be able to support at this point, not because of the merits, but just because of the context in which it's being presented.
So
I'll address the issue of the reserve first. So we hold a reserve that's roughly 50% of our annual spend on winter maintenance. It's really designed such that if we had a very difficult winter, higher than normal snowfall, higher than normal number of events, and we overspend in the year, we have the reserve to draw on so that we don't have a deficit on our budget, which, as you know, legally we're not allowed to do. So the reserve helps with that. And then in years where we have surpluses, we replenish the reserve. So we maintain it at that 50% of our annual budget level. So what Jeff is proposing is the reserve would be used to cover the cost if council approves the additional services for November and December, which are in the current fiscal year. And then the cost would be part of our budget for the 2020 fiscal year, which runs from January 1st to December 31st. So really, we would just stopgap it with the reserve for 2 months, and then we would build it into our budget if it is a level of service that council wishes to provide. In terms of the 2020 budget impact, we treat it the same as any new service request. So we have new service requests in our budget 2020 for fire. We have new, which is the continuation of the program that we introduced in 2019. And then we have new service requests in there for transit. And if this were something that council wanted to implement, there would be a new service request in there. It's not, it isn't our typical fashion to look at and say, well, if you're adding service A, we're going to delete service B. I mean, new services are new services. In this case, it would be an enhancement to our existing level of service for winter maintenance. We look at budget reductions differently. We do those through, efficiencies. We may look at adjusting levels of service, but those are done on more of a contextual basis. So an example I would give you is, we look at My Way routes, and we have certain standards of ridership and revenue that we expect them to meet. Any that fall below, we bring a report to council and we recommend that those routes be taken out of service. But that's not done in the context of, well, we're doing that because we want to do more on winter maintenance. We do that in terms of, we don't believe these routes are not performing, and therefore we recommend they be taken out because we would prefer to invest our money in routes that provide a higher level of service. So this is really a service addition. It will have a budget impact. As Jeff has noted, the number combined, if you do both, is 1.4% for 2020. When we go out to tender our winter maintenance contract next year, we don't know what those results will be. There may be cost efficiencies and savings, and there may be cost increases. We will only know that when we go out and do the procurement. So you really, if you make the decision to, I agree with you, if you do this in November and December, it's going to be hard to stop in January. So I think the question, what you're really deciding is, do you want to implement this for this coming winter season or not? You can pause and wait, and we can put these in as provisional services in our tender and then look at it in the total context of both the new tender and the new pricing, which I think is really, quite frankly, what staff would recommend you do. So,
Councillor DeMerle, you're still on the board. If she could be back up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Janice, for that clarification. So what I would like to do is actually defer this. To me, it makes no sense to put in a service for 2 months and then have to come back and look at it again for a new season. We should just look at all of them together, all of the different proposals, including, I think, Councillor Parrish wants the windrow, all of them together, and prioritize rather than introducing this for 2 months, sort of getting boxed into having to do it. Once you do it for 2 months, it's really difficult to pull, and I don't understand why we would do it for 2 months. So my preference would be, I don't know how this works, whether I have to bring forward a motion to defer this until we can vote on all of the, holistically as part of the budget review.
Okay, so Jeff, you respond, and then we'll...
I was just going to provide some clarification, Madam Mayor, to the councillor's comment that if council provides direction today for a service level increase, then that would be the service level increase for this winter season, which would include the first 2 months of 2019 plus the residual of the winter starting in 2020. So it would become part of our winter maintenance program. We wouldn't just be looking to introduce it for 2 months. It would form part of that. So we've outlined the financial impact. But as Janice said, one option, as you're suggesting, would be a deferral, which we would then include all of these items as provisional items in our future winter maintenance contract.
I mean, if you want, you can just receive the report today for information and give us direction to put these items in as provisional items in the winter maintenance tender that we will be doing for 2020 in any event.
So I will take that advice and put that motion on the floor.
So you're going to, you want to remove receipt of the report, just for clarification. Okay. Councillor Dasco?
And thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks staff for doing this. I agree with Councillor Parrish that this is a great initiative. I think this is more of a seniors initiative, quite frankly, the way I look at it. I know Councillor Parrish's ward she's got senior concerns. I do as well. I think this is a great initiative. I'm not big on the Rolls-Royce version of this. It's more of probably kind of a measured approach, but I would be supportive of going forward with the motion as it is.
Okay. So we have a motion to receive and a motion to accept the recommendations coming forward in sometime soon. Councillor Sato.
Thank you. I feel that the pedestrian accessibility at bus stops is critical, and I think we should have been doing it all along. That service is probably the one that I get the most complaints about. I do get the windrow complaints, but when you have citizens that we are trying to get to use our transit service, we need to make it safe and accessible for them to get there. Councillor Mahoney and I hear quite frequently from the members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee that it's great that we have accessible buses, but unfortunately they can't maneuver their wheelchair to get to the bus itself. I've personally driven by and I've seen the bus stop, and I sent a text when I got here to Councillor Parrish down Highway 10, where the bus stop, the access from the shelter to the bus was cleared, but there was no access from the sidewalk to the shelter. It was just snow piled up and nobody could get through. I watched a lady climbing over a huge snowbank on Highway 10, walking along the road to get to the bus stop so she could stand on the cleared portion. So to me, this is not a frill. I think we should have been doing it all along. Should probably be in the transit budget rather than the snow clearing. But regardless, my question is, if we were to not do the bike lanes on the roadways, because I'm prepared to wait until we look at that as part of the contract, we could take the entire 2019 and 2020 cost of improving the bus stops and the sidewalks around the bus stops. We could take it out of the reserve. It would be less than the entire year would still be less than what you would be taking out of the reserve just for the bike lanes. So we would still be, and I appreciate, I'm glad I suggested looking at the reserves when we first got the report, because I think that's a way that we can provide a service that is not a frill. It's a critically needed service that we should have been providing all along. So if we did that, it would be $2.2 million is the annual cost for improving the bus stops. If we did both, we would be taking $3 million out of reserves just for 2019. So by using the reserves, we could get the entire 2020 and 2019 just for the bus stops, and then build it in, because that would then allow you to build that in with the contract while still providing the service through the next year.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Sato, yeah, that's correct. So there is a cost for 2019, which we identified as .9 million for that initiative. Then there's a cost for 2020, which
Right.
is January to end of December.
So we're looking 3 million.
Yeah, so it's 2.2 plus 0.9, so you're looking at 3.1 million. But so that cost could be factored into the winter maintenance reserve. So you are correct, we could do that, and then report back through our business planning and budget process, you know, how that would then roll into our annual operating budget.
Okay, because you know, when you very clearly explained how I was surprised that we had that much in the reserve. I knew we had a good reserve, but I didn't know that we were that much difference between the 7.5 million average or whatever it was to the 12. And I don't want to see us, you know, continually beating down that reserve, because we could have a really, really bad winter, hopefully not, where it is going to eat into the reserve. But I would move that we use the reserve to fund the pedestrian and accessibility improved service at bus stops. I think it's critical. You know, we can't have pedestrians out there trying to get to a bus, and we're pushing transit. You know, we can't be pushing people to leave their cars at home and use transit if we don't make it safe for them to get to the transit stop. I mean, it's kind of a moot point. So I would move that, I know there is a motion of receipt, but I would like us to seriously consider taking the 3.1 from the reserves, not doing both programs, but doing the bus stops for the next year,
Yeah,
So
so,
just for clarification.
and then building
Yeah.
it into the contract.
yeah, so to be
Oh,
clear.
Mickey's jumping up here.
Yeah, no, to be
But I
clear.
think also, hang on, because second, Janice, I think Councillor Dasco wants to move the recommendations, so that your motion will be
I'm just
third.
moving one half of the
Third.
recommendation. I'm
But it's-
taking the bus lane,
I
the bike
understand,
lanes
but
out.
you'll be third to be
These
voted on.
these are options, not recommendations, so staff didn't recommend
There's no
anything, we just
recommendation.
brought you information. So just to be clear on that, and Gary corrected me, I said 50%, it's actually 30, it's a third of our annual winter maintenance costs that we keep. So the reserve is set as a stopgap for unusually difficult seasons, right? So if we can do that, we can take the money out of the reserve to cover 19 and 20. That will leave you with a tax pressure of $3 million in 2021, because it's not sustainable to
No, I
take it out
realize
of the
that.
reserve. So in 2021, you'll have a tax pressure of $3 million, which is roughly about,
Almost a
oh,
point.
sorry, 2.2 is the annual, so roughly about, what, a third of?
You said 0.4 tax.
0.4, yeah.
0.04.
And we will need to replenish that reserve over time back up to the 1/3, but we can typically do that out of annual surpluses, so that's not a huge challenge for us. That's something that can happen over a couple of budget years, assuming that we have surpluses. But that is how we would treat it based on Councillor Sato's request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rass?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good discussion today. I'm back and forth on this in my head a number of times, both from an accessibility perspective and from a financial perspective. I would actually support a direction with respect to the priority bus stops at this point, what Councillor Sato had mentioned. I also agree with some of the other speakers that once you start doing a service, you really can't pull it back. So
That's right.
we're either in it or we're not at this point. But I think that's certainly an area that I hear from. I look forward to seeing what the costs are related to the the secondary sidewalks as well going forward. I know that's going to be a costly exercise, but again, I'll bring people back to when we look at our customer service queries, or what's it called? I can't even think right now. When we ask residents what services they like and cherish most, winter maintenance is one of them.
Always comes
What
up.
I would ask staff is if we're looking at these things and there needs to be a commensurate decrease elsewhere in the budget, we just can't keep building up these services and expect nothing else to give. So I think we're going to take a critical eye when it comes budget time to reduce in other areas to offset the property tax increases. Thank you.
Councillor Parrish, please.
Yes, I support the bus clearance or bus accessibility stops, and I can defend that, even if we don't retrieve the money. I would have a hard time defending winter maintenance on bike lanes. The ones on the road, I can understand are easier to clear than the ones that are up on the pathways, which I think we end up clearing anyway. But for the number of people that actually bike in the winter in a snowstorm compared to the seniors that need to get at a bus stop, or the seniors who need windrow clearance, I can't defend bike trails. I think it's a good weather sport and a good weather mode of transportation, but I'm happy to endorse A, not necessarily B. I won't, and if somebody moves a motion that doesn't have B, I'll support it.
Got it, we understand. Okay, back to Councillor Demurla.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted some clarification around, I think there's been some good discussion, some good compromises suggested, but I wanted to understand one thing. If council wants to do the bus stop piece, and we wanted to start it in January instead of starting it in, because January is when the whole year starts. What I'm just trying to understand is my quarrel really isn't so much with the merits of the proposals in front of us. My issue is more around how we deliberate and how we decide on these priorities. And to Councillor Raz's point, well, what gives when you add another level of service, or where do we find the efficiencies? I don't have the full picture to be able to weigh in. So what I'm trying to understand is, if we were to vote now and say yes to bus stops, it starts in October, or, but snow really doesn't come till whenever, December. Or what's the other option? Like if what I am really asking for is not so much a yes or a no per se on the merits, but more around how do we prioritize all of the different things in front of us. If we wanted to delay it, which is what I'm asking, what would be the earliest we could start any of these services? I mean, there's not just one, a number of them that are bubbling up.
I'll let Jeff speak to, or Mickey speak to, logistics and timing. I mean, we have to pick a date by which we want to start the service so that they can be ready. So that date is either going to be start of the winter season in November. There may be reasons why January. We may as well be ready in November as January. So I'll let them speak to the logistics. The whole issue, though, of the impact on the budget and offsets. So we have had many, many discussions. We've had many exercises over the years around service cuts in other areas and what do we trade off. And the simple answer typically that we get is, well, really at the end of the day, there's nothing that we want to cut. I mean, most often the conversations that we're having around the budget table are things that we want to do more of. More library hours, more winter maintenance, better services. Why can't we clear the park path in the winter? So it's really difficult for me to say, no problem, we'll take that away and we'll come back and we'll give you a menu of things that you can either eliminate or, if you don't want to grow transit, then we can take that off the table in January. If we don't want to meet our response times in fire, I mean, we made the business case for that in last budget and council approved it. You can stop doing some of these things, you can slow down the new stuff. But in terms of taking away service levels that we provide today, that has proven to be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. And so I don't want to leave council with the impression that we can find an easy fix for you that will take $2 million out of the budget so that you can add in a new level of service in January or November, because we do have the option of using the reserve to bridge. And I think that is, if you have suggestions to make to us as to areas that you think we are doing stuff that we shouldn't be doing, then I'm happy to take those back and we'll give you impact analysis and say if we stop doing A, B, or C, here's what it would mean, here's who will be impacted, you know, and these may very well be impacts that you're prepared to accept. But I think we've been down this road many, many times, and the bottom line is, I have an expression I've used before, I still only have pork, chicken, and beans on the menu. You know, there's no magic solution or magic bullet to this. When you want to do more, and it costs more, unless there's a user fee that comes with it, it is typically a tax increase, and that has been, that's usually the answer you're going to get from this side of the table.
So just for clarification, because if we did just the bus stop piece, what would it mean in terms of a tax increase for 2020?
Well, under Councillor Sato's proposal, we would fund it from the reserve, which would mean no tax increase in 2020, but then you would have a tax increase in 2021, and the annual cost is just over $2 million, so it's about a 0.4% that you will be pretty much committed to for 2021.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dasko?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I just wanted to say I'm overall supportive of this, but I think, like some of the other speakers have said here today, I think we have to kind of pick and choose, and as Janice has mentioned, you know, there's was it pork, chicken, and beans on the menu kind of thing, and you have to kind of choose from that, and I love that, never heard that before, but it's a good one. And so I think, you know, if we are looking to do this, which again, I say is really kind of tailoring towards the seniors, is why I would be in support of this, whether it's bus stops or some priority roads, you know, priority sidewalks. Some of the bike paths, I don't know, are part of that. I think that's more of the Rolls-Royce package, and I just from a budgetary point of view, I wouldn't be supportive of that right now. I would be in support of, I thought what we did last year in terms of just around the bus stops, priority areas, these are the ones that were kind of near and dear that I heard a lot about. I didn't hear some of the other commentary, so I would be in support of going with kind of the pork, chicken, and beans type of thing.
So, Councillor Dasko, I'm hearing that you will not move all the recommendations. You will support Councillor Councillor Sato's recommendation for one. Okay. Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of weigh in here too with my opinion. I do totally agree with Councillor Sato, not only as a member of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, but I did hear a lot of complaints or concerns this past winter. I know it was a real struggle for winter for our team, but those sidewalks and accessing those bus routes are important for seniors, important for those who don't have cars to get to work. So from my perspective, I think that's the right way forward. We can look at some steak down the road, not just chicken and pork, but for now I'd like to stick with that process, and I do support Councillor Sato's suggestion, and I think that's where we should go. Thank you.
Too much sizzle for you, huh? Councillor Demerla. Councillor Demerla?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. The discussion, I get the sense that clearing snow for seniors is something that we should be doing, and it's not a nice to do. I do have one question for Council again. In terms of municipalities around us, do they typically, are all of them clearing the snow for the bus stops, and Mississauga is an outlier? I think it's there somewhere, but if you could just refresh my memory on that, because that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll look forward to our staff to come up to speak to the sort of the benchmarking that we did, but to some degree, all municipalities would clear bus stops and sidewalks that are on transit routes. To Councillor Sato's point earlier, it just takes us a bit longer to get to that today because our service levels are such that we would clear the road, and then once that's done, we would come back and clear out the bus stop and the sidewalk, and often there's a delay for transit users that would be climbing over snowbanks and climbing through the snow as they're using transit. So while it does support seniors, it does support all transit users, so students, you know, all demographics that would be utilizing transit. So I see Mickey here, so I'll let him talk about sort of the benchmarking on this level of service.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Damerla, we did not benchmark that. We benchmarked who does secondary sidewalks, and who doesn't. We did not benchmark the timing of when other municipalities do bus stops and priority sidewalks. So at this time, staff can't answer that question. And Jeff is correct. What we're proposing is to expedite the timing of when we do bus stops and priority sidewalks to have it more aligned with when we do the priority roads.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean, it would have been useful to have had that comparison because that would have made it a little bit easier. I just wanted to say, Chair, that it appears that most people on council would like to go with the option that Councillor Saito has provided. I'm okay to support that as well, but keeping in mind that that does mean that we're baking in today pretty much a 0.4% increase in the next budget year. But it appears that it's a reasonable request and it's something we're going to have to live with.
Okay, so I'm hearing no motion for receipt from you. Councillor McFadden?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly I'll support Councillor Saito. That was one of the big issues in Ward 10 that I heard through the winter. And the other is I'd like to thank staff that are here today because we have implemented the no parking on one side of the street in Ward 10 on 80 streets throughout the area, and we aren't getting a lot of pushback on it, which is excellent because service always comes first. And more comments on how glad they are that this is happening. So good on you, good on us for taking the initiative and making sure that we get service in Ward 10. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Rass?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I guess my question to Janice or Jeff, just in terms of clarification for timing. So we start this year, we could have a drawdown of up to 900,000 in 2019, assuming the weather is not cooperative. It's built into the operations or reserve budget for 2020?
It will be built into our operations budget, funded from the reserve for 2020.
Funded from the reserves in 2020, and then because it's going out to tenor in 2020, we'll have a much broader discussion on all of these things that we've spoken about or are listed in the report for the 2021 budget.
That's through Madam Mayor to the Councillor. That's correct. So we'll be going out to tender in early 2020 and with a report back to General Committee later in 2020 to inform of the tender results and the sort of the suite of options for Council consideration on service level increases. That would then form the basis of our 2021 budget.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
And to Councillor Parrish.
I just can't help but comment that if we get our freedom from the region, we won't be worrying about 0.4% increase. We're going to have millions to serve the seniors and all the residents of our city like they're all made of gold. I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay. So I am hearing that we have a motion moved by Councillor Saito. We have a motion for number 2, which is the Budget Committee approve increased winter maintenance service levels for pedestrian accessibility at bus stops and on priority sidewalks. That's a little bit different, I'm hearing. Okay. Moved by Councillor Saito, second by Councillor Mahoney, that increased winter maintenance service levels for pedestrian accessibility at bus stops and on priority sidewalks be approved, that the gross budget for cost center bus stop clearing and sanding number 24270 be increased by a total of 3.1 million overall over a 2-year period, funded from the winter maintenance reserve number 30120, with a net budget impact of $0 for 2019 and 2020, that the purchasing agent be authorized to increase the existing contracts for the winter maintenance issued pursuant to procurement number FA49.3.24.14, that all necessary bylaws be enacted, and that staff report back to General Committee on the results of the procurement for the new winter maintenance contract, including recommendations regarding winter maintenance service levels over the duration of the new contract as outlined in the report from the Commissioner of Transportation and Works dated June 21st, 2019, and entitled Winter Maintenance Service Level Improvements. All right. Everyone understands what we're voting on? It is a recorded vote. And it is unanimous. Thank you very kindly. That is 12.1, and now we are